The content of this episode is for entertainment purposes only. Historical events and figures discussed are based on documented records, scholarly research, and primary sources. This episode discusses 17th century religious practice, mental health and historical context, and the life of a cloistered woman. And it approaches all three of those with care. The Velvet Guillotine does not endorse any political, religious, or ideological interpretation of the events portrayed. The examination offered here is directed at a modern decoding claim and the construction of a historical mystery, and not any faith, religious community, or the belief of its adherents. And definitely not at the woman at the center of this story, who is treated throughout with respect. Listener discretion is advised. On the morning of August 11th, 1676, the sisters of the Benedictine convent of Palma di Montechiaro, on the southern coast of Sicily, found one of their own on the floor of her cell. Her name in religious life was SisterMaria Crocifissa della Concezione. The name that she had been given at birth was Isabella Tomasi. She was 31 years old. She had been a nun since she was 15, and she came from one of the most powerful noble families in all of Sicily, the Tomasi. That is the same family that would 3 centuries later produce the author of Il Gattopardo, or The Leopard, which is one of the greatest novels of modern Italian literature. She was on the floor. Her face was smeared with ink, and she had a sheet of paper beside her that was also stained with ink, and it was very smeared. On the paper, in a hand that was recognizably hers, but that was producing characters that no one in the convent had ever seen, was a block of writing. Sister Maria was conscious. She was disoriented, though, and she told the sisters what had happened to her. She had been, she said, attacked by the devil. The devil had come into her cell, and the devil had wrestled with her on the floor for hours. The devil had attempted to force her to renounce her vows, to declare her allegiance to him, and to sign her name on a contract abandoning God. She had, she said, refused. She had refused with every fiber of her body and her soul, and the devil was furious. The devil had grabbed her hand, and the devil had used her hand, against her will, mind you, to write a letter. The letter on the piece of paper beside her, in her account, was the devil's own composition. He had dictated it through her body in a language not of this world. The characters were his, not hers, and she didn't even know what they said, and she didn't want to know what they said. She was simply, on the morning of August 11th, 1676, a young Sicilian nun who had survived a night of spiritual combat and who had somehow the document of that battle in her own handwriting right beside her on the floor. And that letter would, in some form or another, survive the next 349 years. Nobody in that entire span would be able to read it. Welcome to Dastardly Objects. I'm April Rain, and today we're going to sit with one of the strangest single documents in the history of European Christianity. Written by a real woman in a real convent in real ink that we can verify still exists, and an archive that we can still consult. And we ask, what exactly happened on the night of August the 10th, 1676? The supernatural framing is just one possibility. It is not, on the available evidence, the most interesting one. And I will tell you now, right before we start, that I am going to handle this one differently than I handle most of the other ones that come across your feed from me, because there is a real woman at the center of this, and I think that she should get the respect of the entire room. So let me start with the woman. Because for the first time in this series, I am dealing with a haunted object case where the person at the center of the object is genuinely well documented, named, dated, and locatable in a real historical context. And she is worth knowing about as a person before we ever even get to what she did and what was done to her. Isabella Tomasi was born in 1645 in the town of Palma di Montechiaro on the southwestern coast of Sicily. The town had been founded by her family less than a decade before her birth. And the Tomasi were one of the major noble houses of Italy. They had extensive land holdings, they had dynastic alliances, and the kind of regional power that in 17th century Mediterranean was sufficient to literally build a town and populate it with your own retainers. Her father, Julio Tomasi, was a man of intense religious conviction. He founded the convent at Palma di Montechiaro as part of a larger family project of counter-Reformation piety. He had originally intended to enter the religious life himself before the death of his older brothers, and that required him to take up the family life and contain the lineage after their passings. Having been forced into the secular world, he poured significant resources into building the most rigorous Benedictine community that he could establish. And then he sent his daughters to live in it. Isabella entered the convent at the age of 15 in 1660, and her sisters entered as well. The Tomasi family's daughters were essentially dedicated, as a group, to religious life. This was in the 17th century Sicilian noble practice, not unusual. The alternative for a daughter who did not marry, if that was genuinely to remain in the family household indefinitely, as a financial dependent. And the religious life was, in some real sense, the only other option that a noble family had in that time period. Isabella took the religious name Maria Crocifissa della Concezione, Maria for the Virgin, Crocifissa meaning crucified, a name with specific theological implications about the imitation of Christ's suffering, and della Concezione, of the conception, referring to the Immaculate Conception of Mary, which is a particular Marian devotion that was very strong in the 17th century Counter-Reformation theology. The name was, by the standards of the period, significant. It announced an intention to take religious life seriously, to engage with the most demanding aspects of the spiritual tradition, and to suffer in imitation of Christ as a deliberate practice. Sister Maria would, in the years after her profession, live out that name. She fasted to the point of physical collapse. She wore a hair shirt. She slept on bare boards. She inflicted disciplinary wounds on her body. That's the practice of self-mortification, which was common in the most rigorous Catholic religious orders of the period, in which the believer attempts to share in Christ's suffering through the deliberate infliction of bodily pain. She prayed, by the accounts of her sisters in her order, with an intensity that struck even her fellow nuns as exceptional. She also experienced what her contemporaries described, and what we would now describe in very different language, as a series of profound spiritual experiences. She suffered visions. She had auditory phenomena. She suffered periods of what could be called rapture or ecstasy. And in those periods that she was experiencing that rapture or that ecstasy, her sisters described her as appearing to be in some kind of altered state. She was conscious, but not entirely present, and she appeared to be communicating with persons or entities that her fellow sisters simply could not see. The 17th century Catholic tradition had a substantial vocabulary for these experiences too. They could be holy, they could be diabolical, and the distinction between the two was not always easy to establish. And the work of establishing it was the responsibility of the convent's confessor, and, in cases of significant question, of higher ecclesiastical authority. In Sister Maria's case, the experiences were taken as holy, and she was treated within the convent as a contemplative of unusual gifts. She had supporters in the broader Sicilian church hierarchy. She corresponded with confessors and spiritual directors, and some of that correspondence actually survives in the Tomasi family archives today, and it has been the subject of some scholarly attention. and by August 1676, she had been a nun for 16 years. She had a documented history of intense spiritual experience, ascetic practice, and what we can fairly call, from the historical distance, the kind of extreme mental and physical state that the religious life of that period both required and produced in its own committed practitioners. She was, in other words, exactly the kind of person who would have spent the night of August the 10th in a spiritual combat with something that she could not see. Now, let us talk about the document itself. What survives today is not the original letter as it was found on the floor of Sister Maria's cell on August the 11th, 1676. The original document, by all available evidence, has been either lost or has been so severely conserved over the centuries that it does not fully survive in its original form. But what does survive in the archives connected to that Benedictine community at Palma di Montechiaro is a contemporary translation of that letter. It was a copy made within the convent in the days or weeks immediately following the event. The transcription is 1 page, and it contains approximately 14 lines of writing in an unknown script. The characters are striking even without any attempt at decoding them. They combine some recognizable elements from various writing systems, but some of the characters appear to derive from the Latin alphabet in distorted forms, while others resemble Greek letters. Others still resemble Arabic script, and a few resemble runic letters of the kind used in Northern Europe pre-Christianity writing systems. Some of the characters actually resemble nothing in particular, as if they are inventions, or apparently inventions. There's some geometric shapes and some combinations that do not correspond to any written script known to man. The hand, however, is consistent. So whoever wrote this letter knew the characters that they were writing. The pen doesn't appear to hesitate, the strokes are confident, and the character forms are repeated consistently throughout the document. The same letter forms appear in multiple places with kind of stable execution that suggests that the writer had practiced these characters before. This was not, on the evidence of the document itself, the work of someone who was fumbling improvisationally towards something illegible. It was the work of someone writing a script that they could write. And that writer, in the convent's contemporary understanding, was Sister Maria. She held the pen, and the hand that produced the strokes was her hand. The question that the convent and the broader ecclesiastical authorities of the time were trying to answer was, whose mind directed that hand? The answer that Sister Maria gave? Not mine. She maintained in subsequent accounts given to her confessor and to other church officials that the letter had been composed by the devil himself, and she did not understand it. She could not read it, and she had not in any conscious sense chosen the characters or arranged the message. Her body had been used, against her will, to produce a document whose contents were known only to the entity that had compelled their production. This account, in the 17th century Catholic framework, was taken seriously. It was not dismissed as fantasy or hysteria. The convent's leadership and the ecclesiastical investigators who eventually reviewed the case treated the letter as a real artifact requiring real interpretation. The question was not whether the event had happened. The question was what to do about it. Several attempts were made to decode the letter in the weeks and months after it was produced. The convent's confessor even examined it, and a number of educated clergy were consulted. Nobody was able to read it. The characters resisted every analysis. And Sister Maria, in the years following the event, continued her religious life. The episode of August the 10th, 1676 was not the only spiritual experience of intensity that she had had, but it appeared to be the one that was the most dramatic. She died in 1699 at the age of 54, having spent essentially her entire life in the convent at Palma di Montechiaro. And she was, after her death, the subject of a beatification process within the Catholic Church that was, while it did not formally result in formal canonization, it did establish her as a recognized figure of regional Sicilian devotion. And she is today known as the Blessed Maria. And the transcription of her letter survives in her family's archives. For 340 years, it has sat there. Generations of researchers have looked at it, and still none of them could read it. And then, in 2017, somebody claimed that they had. In 2017, a team of researchers at Ludum Science in Catania, Sicily, announced to the world that they had cracked the Devil's Letter. And darlings, do I have to walk you through the methodology? Because the methodology is genuinely one of my favorite things in this entire season. They had, they said, run the unknown script through a decryption software. And I want to give this particular detail its full and proper weight. The decryption software was from the dark web. Tools that, by their own account, that were used by intelligence agencies and security researchers to break modern cryptographic systems. So the image I would like for you to hold lovingly and in your mind is a 17th century Sicilian nun's 14-line note to or from the Prince of Darkness, fed through a piece of intelligence-grade hacking software sourced from the digital underworld, in order to find out, at long last, what Satan had to say. And what did Satan have to say, you ask? Well, according to the partial translation that they produced and released to the press, the letter declared that God did not exist, that Jesus and the Holy Spirit were inventions of mankind, and that the entire apparatus of grace and salvation was a fiction. God and Christ described in one much-quoted rendering as dead weights. Which is to say, the devil, pried open after 3.5 centuries by software from the dark web, he turned out to say precisely, exactly to the letter what a 17th century Catholic imagination would have scripted for him to say in the first place. He came through clear as a bell and impeccably on brand and message for himself. Not one surprise, not one note of it, and the most predictable correspondence in the history of the underworld. The story, as you would expect, went absolutely everywhere. The Times of London, The Guardian, outlets all across America. Every paranormal site with a functioning server had to get a piece of this. And the framing was almost uniformly as a triumph. A century-old mystery solved at long last, the devil's own words revealed. And would you believe it? They were diabolical. Now, I'm going to slow down and lay it out properly why I do not buy this. Not to play the killjoy, not to play the buzzkill. There is nothing I love more than a genuinely solved mystery, let me put that out there. But because the problems are real and substantial, and because the woman at the center of this deserves a great deal better than just a press release. The first problem is cryptographic, and it is fatal. The kind of statistical attack that breaks a modern cipher needs a substantial body of text to chew on. Known statistical properties, repetition, and enough material to constrain the solution. The Devil's Letter is 14 lines. 14. And it is, by the standards of the analysis that they claim to be running, almost nothing. There is simply not enough there to break, because there's not enough here to constrain what a break could be. And the second problem is that there was no peer review. The decoding was announced by press release. It was not published in any venue where other cryptographers and paleographs could examine the cipher mechanism that they claimed to have found. The assumptions that they made about the underlying language is the exact transformations that produce the translation. and the work that scholarship requires to take a decoding seriously was simply never shown. The third problem, and this one is actually the most telling, and is also one the breathless coverage sailed right on past. The transaction is suspiciously, immaculately right on the nose. Winner, winner, chicken dinner, everybody called it. It is exactly what an early modern Catholic framework would have predicted that the devil would say, in language that maps neatly onto the 17th century theological controversy. Now, that could mean that the devil really did dictate it and really say what's on that script, or it could mean that decoders working with far too little data to pin down a single solution produced a translation shaped, above all, by their own expectations of what it ought to contain. And that second thing, it has a name in cryptography. It is called a confirmation bias, and a short, ambiguous ciphertext is the single most fertile soil for it to exist. You can go in expecting the devil, and you come out astonishingly with the devil. So that brings me to the fourth problem. And the fourth problem was the reception that this find received. Historians of religion, historians of Sicily, cryptographers, paleographers of early modern Italian manuscript culture. The scholarly response has been, on the whole, politely unconvinced. The consensus, as best that I can determine, is that the Ludum decoding does not meet the bar to be accepted as a successful translation. In scholarly terms, the letter remains exactly as it was, undeciphered. But that does not prove that the Ludum team was wrong, and I want to be fair to them. If they have genuine work, they remain entirely free to publish a real methodology that would change the picture. And I would happily eat my words, by the way. But the burden of proof in a decoding falls on the person announcing that decoding. And the piece of dark web software, a 14-line letter, and a translation that tells you precisely what you had hoped to hear? Well, that, my darlings, does not discharge that burden not one bit. It just makes for a wonderful headline. Now what I want to do is what this series does when it comes to genuinely strange documents. Not necessarily debunk them, but lay out the range of possible explanations and ask which ones are consistent with the available evidence. And here's where all my lightness goes back in the box, because this is the part that's actually about her. Possibility 1. The devil really did dictate the letter through SisterMaria. This is the explanation that she gave herself. It is the explanation that her contemporary Catholic context found credible. It is, on present-day grounds, the explanation that requires the most additional assumptions to maintain. There's the existence of the devil as a real entity. There's the capacity to dictate letters through human hands, and his specific willingness to do so in this convent in this year, and the survival of the result into the record. I am not in any position to rule it out, but I am not in any position to advance it as the most economical account. Possibility 2. She produced the letter unconsciously, knowing exactly what she was doing, and describing it as the devil's work to disguise her own authorship. So, this requires a very specific type of fraud. A young noblewoman, 16 years into a rigorous religious community, devises an unknown script, staging an attack scene with ink across her face and a smeared page, and maintaining the deception for the rest of her life? I mean, what motive would she have? She gained nothing materially. She didn't rise in the hierarchy. She was treated as a sister of unusual gifts, yes, but she did not, on the documentary record, parlay the incident into any advancement of any kind. And a hoax without no payoff? Well, that's kind of a weird hoax, don't you think? Which brings me to possibility 3, that she experienced a dissociative episode. And that is, in modern psychiatric terms, a category covering altered states of consciousness. It also covers behavior produced outside ordinary volitional control and the experience of one's own actions as if performed by an external agent. Dissociative phenomena are well documented in the modern clinical literature. They occur, in particular, in people who have experienced significant trauma, who are under severe psychological stress, or who practice the kind of intense ascetic or meditative disciplines that some religious traditions cultivate. SisterMaria had been fasting severely, sleeping minimally, mortifying her body, and praying with substantiated intensity for 16 years. And those are, in modern clinical understanding, very close to the exact conditions under which phenomena like this most readily emerges. Under this third explanation, the letter is real. She really did write it, and the unusual characters are real. Her hand made the strokes, and the phenomenology of being controlled by an external agent is also real. She did experience the writing as something done to her rather than by her. And the devil in this account is the cultural framework within which a real psychological experience was interpreted, named, and made socially legible. It is not a lie, and it is not a delusion in the dismissive sense. It is the only language that her world handed her for what was happening inside her. And this is, I would argue, the explanation most consistent with the evidence. It does not require the devil to exist, and it does not require the nun to be a fraud. It treats both the document and the experience as real, while locating their production in a mechanism that we have substantial modern reason to believe operates in roughly the conditions that she was living under. And the unknown script becomes, under this reading, genuinely fascinating. The clinical literature includes documented cases of people in altered states produced in writing systems that resemble real scripts without being identifiable as any specific one. Sometimes it's called automatic script, and by analogy with the spoken glossolalia documented in some religious and psychological settings. The writing looks meaningful to the person producing it, but it often carries structural echoes of the writer's native language without being that language. And it can resist decoding for the simplest possible reason. It is not encoding anything. It may be the output of a brain producing the appearance of writing without initiating a system that any other reader could ever recover. If that is what happened, then the Ludum team's failure to decisively crack the letter is not a failure at all. There may be nothing in there to crack, and the door that they were trying to open may not have a room behind it that looks quite the way that they imagined. Only a woman's mind, under unbearable discipline, doing something that we are only now acquiring the vocabulary to describe. Now, I want to take a moment before we close this out on why I think that this particular object is among the most important that we have looked at in this series, despite being one of the least known. Compare it to the rest of this season's lineup, my darlings, and the contrast is almost embarrassing. The Annabelle case, darlings, rests on unverifiable witness testimony from the early 1970s. The Dybbuk box was, by its own author's later admission, substantially constructed. And the Hope Diamonds curse was essentially written by a single jeweler in the 1910s to move merchandise. The anguished man's alleged history is undocumented to the point of vapor. The Bassano vase may not have even existed. And the crystal skulls, the ancient, mythical, pre-Columbian crystal skulls, those joints were made in Germany. And most of what I have put on the table has turned out, on inspection, to be thin, built, or both. And the Devil's Letter is none of those things. It is genuinely old, 3.5 centuries to be precise. It has provenance that we can trace in real archives to a real person whose biography is well documented. It has a contemporary written account of its production, and it is, as a document, available for scholarly examination at any time. But it has not, as far as I can determine, been meaningfully embellished since it was made. The mystery here is not whether the object is what it appears to be, because it is. The mystery is what happened in that cell. And the most remarkable thing about it is that the modern explanations available to us, dissociative phenomena, automatic script, the documented psychological effects of extreme religious asceticism, do not make this case any less interesting. They may actually make it more interesting. They locate the phenomena in a real human mind, in a real historical context, and under real conditions that we can actually analyze. Isabella Tomasi, the noblewoman who became SisterMaria, lived an interior life that we can only partly reconstruct. We know that she fasted severely. We know that she mortified her body. And we know that she slept little and prayed with extraordinary intensity. We know she experienced events that her contemporaries took seriously and understood, within her framework, as direct encounters with holy and demonic forces. Under those conditions, on the night of August 10th, 1676, something happened to her. Something that left enough of a physical disturbance that the sisters found her on the floor the next morning, ink on her face, an unfamiliar script beside her, conscious but undone. Something she experienced as combat, and something that she experienced as an external seizing her hand. The devil is one description of what happened to her, and it is, in my judgment, probably not the right one. But it was the description that she had, in the language of the tradition that she lived inside of, and in the description that she herself gave. So what I want to take seriously is the experience underneath it. You have a young woman in a stone cell in the 17th-century Sicily, alone in the dark, in a body that she had spent 16 years deliberately weakening, in a mind that she had spent the same years deliberately reshaping through the most rigorous discipline that her culture possessed at the time, undergoing some internal event of such force that her hand produced characters that she did not consciously choose, on a page that she did not consciously remember searching for. That is the real human experience, and we have actual substantiated evidence that it did indeed happen. The document is the residue of all of that. Whether we call it demonic possession or dissociative phenomenology, the woman was real. The night was real. The morning with the ink on her face was also real. The letter is real, and it has sat in the archives for almost 3.5 centuries, refusing to let anyone read it. And that, I think, is what genuine mystery looks like. Not the manufactured ambiguity of objects framed to seem mysterious, but genuine mystery in real history, and attached to a real person in a real place on a real date with real documents and real witnesses and real reasons to take the underlying thing seriously. Because even when we suspect that the supernatural framing was the only language that she had for what was actually happening to her. All right, so let me come back to the document itself really quick, because I want to spend the last act on the question that I have not fully answered yet. What kind of object exactly is the Devil's Letter? It is materially a piece of paper, or rather the surviving copy is. It's the contemporary translation made inside the convent in the weeks after the event, and it's been preserved in SisterMaria's family archives ever since. It has been there, continually, for over 300 years. And in that sense, it is one of the best provenance objects in the entire season. We can trace its location, its custodianship, and its condition through documented records that have never seriously been interrupted. It is also, of everything that we have looked at, the object most defined by what is on it rather than what it is. The Voynich manuscript is the closest cousin in this season, and it is also defined by its writing. But the Voynich is a substantial codex with illustrations, structure, and 240 pages. The devil's letter is simply one page. It's 14 lines, and the object exists almost entirely as a surface for a script that nobody can read, which makes it a particularly pure case of what I have been calling all season, the object as a bearer of legend. And the legend here is not a curse, or a haunting in the usual sense, or even a commercial fraud. The legend is a question. What does this writing say? The object's entire cultural life is generated by that single question. Every researcher who has examined it for 3 centuries has done so hoping to answer that very question. The Ludum team tried, but nobody has succeeded. And as long as the question stays open, the object holds a specific kind of power. Not the power of a curse and not the power of a haunting, but the power of a closed door. This is a different category of haunted object than most of what we had covered. The crystal skulls were a closed door that turned out to be wallpaper, and the Dybbuk box was a closed door that someone built into a wall that had no door before. And the devil's letter is a closed door behind which there is genuinely something. Possibly the devil, but possibly not. Or it could possibly be an early modern phenomenology of dissociative writing that we are only beginning to have the words for. Possibly something else entirely too. And behind this door there is something. The script is real, and the hand that wrote it was real. The mind that directed the hand, whatever we want to call it, was real. The only question is what the relationship between the hand and the mind was on that specific night that the letter was made, and whether that relationship is one that we can name in modern terms or in one that still needs a framework that we don't have yet. This is the kind of object that the haunted object genre is, at its best. This is exactly what it's for. Not any manufactured legend, and not a commercial fraud, not a displaced history. The real, strange, genuinely mysterious cases where something happened to a real person and the object survives as the residue of that happening. And the question of what it actually was remains honestly open. Because the case is the thing, the object is just the object. And sometimes, in the cases that matter the most, the case is the question of what happened to the person who made the object. And the object is the only material trace that we have of an experience that the person could not, in any language available to her at the time, fully describe. So here is what I will tell you about the devil's letter. On the morning of August 11th, 1676, in a convent in southern Sicily, the sisters of a Benedictine community found one of their own on the floor of her cell, and her name was SisterMaria. Her face was smeared with ink, and beside her was a sheet of paper bearing 14 lines of writing in characters no one could read. And she told her sisters that the devil had attacked her in the night and that the writing was his. She was 31 years old. She had been a nun for 16 years, and she had spent those years in some of the most demanding ascetic practices that her tradition offered. She lived for another 23 years, died at 54, and is today a recognized blessed of the Catholic Church. The letter, in transcription, survives in the archives of her family. It has resisted decoding for 349 years. A team in 2017 claimed a partial translation using software from the dark web. The translation has not been accepted by the scholarly community. So whatever this letter says, or if it says nothing at all, the woman who wrote it was real. The night that produced it was real. And the experience that she had, whatever we call it, whatever framework we use, was real. That, in the end, is the only thing that I'm sure of. The supernatural framing is one possibility. The dissociative framing is another. And the fraud explanation, in this case, asks for more than the evidence will give. So what we have is a real woman in a real archive behind a real closed door. And that door has been closed for 3.5 centuries. And it may stay closed for another 3.5. The door is just part of what that object actually is. And I think, unlike most of the objects that I have discussed this season, the closed door in this case is one that we should actually respect. Some doors should be opened. Some legends should be debunked. Some institutions should be challenged for their decision to keep displaying objects that they know are fake. And some women who experienced something that they could not name in a stone cell in the 17th century in Italy deserve to have the document of their experience left as the document of their experience. Understood as well as we can manage from the outside, but not flattened into any interpretation that we happen to find most comfortable, and not declared solved by anyone who has not done the work to actually solve it. The case is the thing. The object is just the object. And sometimes the object is also a witness. And the witness, even after all this time, is still on the floor of the cell with the ink on her face, trying to tell us what happened. This has been The Velvet Guillotine, and I'm April Rain. Dastardly Objects continues next week with some other famous discoveries in the modern era. Stay dark.